Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to subscribe to Toronto Maple Leafs News today and stay tuned for all the latest updates on our favorite team. So, let's talk about the recent move that has some Leafs fans scratching their heads. The signing of Steven Lorentz to a professional tryout offer, PTO. Now, you might be wondering, why would the Toronto Maple Leafs take a chance on a player like Lorentz, who's known mostly as a fourth-liner? The answer is simple, it's all about the salary cap. The Leafs are right up against the cap, meaning they need to find cheap contracts to fill out their roster. But with a talented prospect pool, why bring in Lorentz instead of promoting from within? Well, here's the thing, some of the contracts in the Leafs' bottom six are quite expensive, and one of the key examples is David Kampf. Kampf is a reliable defensive forward, but let's be honest, he's not exactly lighting up the scoreboard. And yet, he's carrying a price tag of $2.4 million per season, heading into the second year of a 4-year deal. For a fourth-line center with little offensive upside, that's a steep cost. This is where Lorentz comes in. If he impresses during training camp, the Leafs could sign him to a league minimum deal, making him a cheaper alternative to Kampf. Worst case, Lorentz doesn't stick with the team and ends up playing for the Marlies. Noir, Nouveau. Now, let's compare the two. Last season, Lorentz played in 38 games for the Panthers, posting 3 points, and added another 3 points during the Panthers' playoff run. Kampf, on the other hand, notched 8 goals and 19 points in 78 games. Statistically, it's reasonable to believe that Lorentz could match Kampf's offensive output while bringing similar defensive value to the table. But here's where things could get interesting. What if the Leafs decided to keep both Kampf and Lorentz? It's a possibility, especially if the Leafs are considering moving Kampf up to the third line while keeping Lorentz on the fourth. This might raise some concerns, though, especially when you consider that Kampf's offensive production is pretty minimal, and the Leafs have struggled with depth scoring in the playoffs year after year. Still, there's a key reason this setup might work. The Leafs are thin at center. Beyond Austin Matthews and assuming John Tavares remains the second-line center, the options get a little shaky. Max Domi hasn't been particularly effective as a third-line center, and while Nylander or Marner could theoretically play center, the team hasn't shown much interest in using them there. Plus, while prospects like Easton Cowan and Fraser Minton could see time this season, they may not be ready for full-time NHL duty just yet. Steven Lorentz has become a potential option for the Toronto Maple Leafs as they look to reinforce their lineup with affordable talent. Should Lorentz perform well during training camp, the Leafs could sign him to a low-cost contract, potentially using him as a depth option. This would make him a cheaper alternative to David Kampf, who brings strong defensive play but limited offensive production. In the event that Lorentz doesn't make the cut, he could simply be assigned to the Toronto Marlies, creating minimal risk for the organization. Looking at their numbers, Lorentz played 38 games for the Florida Panthers last season, recording 3 points in the regular season and another 3 during the playoffs. Kampf, meanwhile, contributed 8 goals and 19 points over 78 games. Based on this comparison, it's reasonable to think Lorentz could match Kampf's offensive output while maintaining a similar defensive presence. If the Leafs opt to retain both Kampf and Lorentz, there's potential for Kampf to move up to the third-line center role, leaving Lorentz as a fourth-line option. This configuration could raise some concerns, particularly given Kampf's limited offensive impact, especially during playoff runs where the Leafs have struggled with depth scoring. However, this setup might still work, as the team lacks strong options at center beyond Austin Matthews and John Tavares. Max Domi hasn't solidified himself as a viable third-line center, and while Nylander or Marner could theoretically shift to the middle, the Leafs have not shown much interest in using them in that role. Prospects like Easton Cowan and Fraser Minton could eventually get their shot, but it's uncertain whether they are ready for full-time NHL responsibilities at this stage. This makes the combination of Kampf and Lorentz a potentially effective, low-risk solution to address the Leafs' depth issues at center. Max Domi has yet to establish himself as a reliable third-line center for the Toronto Maple Leafs, leaving the team with a potential gap in their lineup. While Nylander or Marner could technically step into that role, the coaching staff has shown little interest in using them at center. This opens up the possibility of relying on prospects like Easton Cowan and Fraser Minton, though it's unclear if they're ready for the full-time responsibilities of an NHL center. In light of these uncertainties, A combination of David Kampf and Stephen Lawrence could offer a pragmatic solution to address the Leafs' depth issues down the middle. Kampf, known for his defensive reliability, could maintain his role as a steady third-line presence, while Lawrence, who has shown flashes of two-way capability, could slot into the fourth line. This approach provides a low-risk option to bolster the Leafs' center depth without having to rely on unproven prospects or shifting established wingers out of their natural positions. By leveraging Kampf's experience and Lawrence's potential, the Leafs could create a more balanced and dependable bottom-six unit heading into the season. So, signing Lawrence as the fourth-line center might actually be a smart move. In the worst-case scenario, he becomes solid insurance in case of injuries, and as any experienced hockey fan knows, you can never have too much depth at center. What do you think, Leafs fans? Was signing Stephen Lawrence the right move? Or should the team focus more on their prospects or other options? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like the video and hit that notification bell to stay updated on all things Toronto Maple Leafs news today.